everyone. Welcome to this special edition of CovInspiration with Dayo Israel with the Undersecretary General for Africa at the United Nations. This woman has a dynamic influence. When she was at the African Union, she was able to bring about gender parity because she was on a team of 10 people, 5 men and 5 women that were appointed on the management of the African Union Commission leadership. Now she's also at the UN. And when she was being appointed as the Secretary General for Africa, the Secretary General himself said appointment has brought about achievement of gender parity in the leadership of the 44 member of leadership of the United Nations. Please welcome with me Undersecretary Bience Gawanas. Mama, it's good to see you. How are you doing, ma?
Thank you, Dayo. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity, especially on the Day of the African Child, to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
It's really wonderful to be
We're very grateful that you made the time. We're very grateful that you made the time. So let me hit the button straight from the head. Number one, Madam Secretary, you were born under apartheid in Namibia. As a matter of fact, you saw apartheid first time. At the time, I read that you were, I think, kidnapped by SWAPO, or you were detained by SWAPO, and you went through many experiences. But when you were 18, someone looked at you and said you were less intelligent and did not have the capacity to study law in university. You rose not just to become an advocate, you became a commissioner at the African Union, which is the largest organization in Africa. And today, you are now an Undersecretary General on Africa at the United Nations, the largest organization, multilateral organization in the world. How did you do it?
You know, when they say that you should, when somebody gives you lemon, you must make lemonade. Sorry, I am really sweating. It is hot in here. So
it's okay, ma.
Apologies.
It's okay, ma.
Okay. 16th of June is a very significant day for me. Because after I was told that my intelligence was much lower than that of a white child, I went to study law at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. And whilst I was there at the University of Western Cape, the uprising in Soweto started. So I of that uprising in the Western Cape, we boycotted classes until
you were involved.
I was very much involved.
Wow, that is amazing.
To the point that I got expelled from the university in 1970.
Wow.
Went back to Namibia and got involved, actively involved in the liberation struggle.
Wow.
And that is the route that I took, because I decided that I will not sit back and watch. I have to be part and parcel of the struggle for Namibia's freedom. Subsequent to being active within the SWAPO party, I left into exile, and I lived in exile for 12 years. During that time, I never saw my parents, I never saw my family, because I could not return home. But I am very proud today to say that I was part and parcel of those that brought about Namibia's independence. So I could go and enjoy the fruits of independence. And I'm so glad today on the 16th of June to say to the children of Namibia and to the children of Africa that everything that we did was to make sure that they don't go through what we had gone through. And today, when I talk to my children, or I talk to young people, they cannot imagine what it meant to grow up under apartheid. And so this is where I come from. This is the road that I have traveled. And I'm so glad that I can say today to young women in Africa, when you see us sitting in these positions, don't think that we fell from heaven. We
And
walk.
don't think that we slept with men to get there.
Absolutely not. It was simply being at the forefront, make yourself visible, make your voice heard, and make yourself indispensable. And that is why I am where I am today. And there is no way that that no one can achieve what I have achieved. So yes,
Madam Secretary.
For the 16th of June, 2020.
Wow. Madam Secretary, before we talk about the issues and the politics and the policy and international development, it's important that we understand your story well. You rose from that young girl that was in that experience, that was looked down onto, to become a woman of power. And over through the course of your life, you have also been able to influence policies and promote gender development in different capacities over the world. What are some of the things that kept you going through the process? Because obviously you faced challenges. You were discouraged at different times, and you probably had financial challenges as well. You were living on Exile. You didn't have access to a lot of resources. What kept you going?
Firstly, I was sure that during my lifetime, Namibia will be free. And that as Black people, we will be recognized as human beings with equal rights and equal dignity to anybody else. And so when I went to the African Union and now at the UN, these are two bodies that were very instrumental in the achievement of independence in my country. OAU was very supportive of the Namibian struggle, not just Namibia, but the decolonization of Africa. And so when I went there, I was saying to myself, it's payback time for me as a Namibian. I am going to work for an organization that made it possible for me today to be a free person and to serve the continental body. So I served the AU with pride. I served the AU with a determination that whatever I do, I want to make a difference in the lives of the African people. And so as a commissioner for social affairs, I was instrumental in the development of social development policies and frameworks on the continent. It's a long list. I don't want to go through that long list. But today we have got continental policies in culture, in sports, in health, in migration, name it, because I was basically responsible for about 9 programs as Commissioner for Social Affairs. And then in 2009, I launched a campaign called Karma, the campaign for accelerated reduction of maternal mortality in
Africa. Yes.
And until today, that campaign is still continuing. We have managed through that campaign to put women's health and children's health high on the agenda. And so I can say, looking back, that yes, it has been an opportunity for me to give back to the African people what they gave to Namibia. And the same that I feel being now at the UN.
This is a very inspirational story that you have here, Ma. And people need to hear things like this. When you were going to be sworn in, the Secretary General said your appointment brought about achievement of gender parity in the leadership of the United Nations. The same thing when we were in the African Union. But yet, back at home in Africa, women are still struggling for a seat at the table. How does this make you feel?
I am not that young, as you can see. And I have struggled all my life for that seat at the table. And obviously, you do not want to be the only one that sits at that table amongst men. And so it is always important that when we go up the ladder, that we don't kick the ladder away and allow other women also to climb up that ladder. So when I came to the AU, there were women that were campaigning for 50-50 gender parity at the AU, especially amongst the commissioners. So we have got 5 men and 5 women that are members of the commission. So when I came to the UN, and the Secretary General made it his mandate, basically, to ensure gender parity at the highest levels in the United Nations, I became a beneficiary of that, because as you quite rightly say, with my appointment, the Secretary General achieved gender parity, especially at the level of Assistant Secretary General and Undersecretary General. And as you know, we have got the Deputy Secretary General, who's a woman.
Yes.
Woman from your country, Nigeria.
Yes.
But I want to say about a seat at the table. You know, I always say that it was, I can't say it was easier to fight against apartheid. But I think when it comes to patriarchy and when it comes to sexism, it is difficult, because these are things that live in the heads and in the minds and in the hearts of men. And it takes a long time to have that kind of like cultural change or mindset change. For men to say we had 10 seats at the table occupied only by men, I think it is time that we share the seats at the table equally. But we also know that it will not just happen, that we need to continuously fight. So where I will leave off, I hope the young women will not give up, but continue that fight until we achieve that. In fact, some women says, if there is no seat at the table, we must bring our own chair and occupy that seat. If there is no seat.
But there's a challenge, man. That is the challenge of capacity. There's a dearth of capacity for women. Women are still lacking access to quality education. They're lacking access to skills and opportunities to be able to make something out of their life. And despite all the policies, there are challenges with actually on the ground in ensuring that women actually get the right skills and potential to be able to perform and be able to lead on the continent. How do we deal with the capacity gap?
I don't think it is a question of a capacity gap. I think it is discrimination. That's what it is. Excluding women from access to education or from access to healthcare services. Because, Dayo, since we are talking on the Day of the African Child, and especially also on Youth Day, which is celebrated in South Africa, is that, you know, we need to look at the women's situation in a very holistic way. How many girls are today becoming mothers long before they are adults? So when we are talking about sexual and reproductive health and rights, we are being told that, yes, you know, if you talk about family planning, you are making women to be promiscuous, and no one wants to support it. But the reality of the matter is, unless we keep girls in school, we will always sit with this deficit. So apart from just access to education, it is also how do we empower them to negotiate their sexuality? How do we make sure that they stay in school and remain in school? That for me is a big challenge. because there's a lot of dropouts from school. At least it's not like the olden days where parents would just say that girls cannot go to school and just send their boys. I think there has been a shift. But in the final analysis, when there is a problem at home, when there is supposed to be a caregiver at home where the mother cannot, it will always be the responsibility of the girls and not the boys. So it's about how do we bring up these young people? How do we bring them up today? As much as we youth want to take leadership positions, you still find that amongst youth, the young men are discriminating against young women. One would have thought that in today's world that will not happen. That girls don't need to go through what I went through when I was growing up.
Going to university.
Exactly. I mean, that is, those are the kind of issues that needs to be discussed. In other words, holistically, because I am today, I had the opportunity to go to school and become the lawyer that they said I cannot become. And so because I went to school, I can make decisions today. I am empowered enough to say to a man, you know what? I don't need to depend on you. I don't need to get married to you in order for me to have a living. I can live without.
But we want them to marry us.
That is one thing. That is. I mean, what just to tell you, talking about marriage. When my daughter got married, this traditional thing. It was tough for me to accept. But sometimes you have to accept tradition. So the only ones that could apparently talk were my brothers. I could not say anything because I'm a woman, and I was very irritated about that.
Wow.
But then at the same time, when it was now time for my son to say something, he says, I don't agree with this thing that Gareth wants to marry my sister. No, these two people are marrying each other. So I don't see why Gareth must come and ask for my daughter, my sister, to marry him. They are marrying each other. So these are the contradictions that exist. On the one hand, you have the new enlightened societies. You also have your traditions that you have to respect. So how do you navigate around all these issues all the time?
And at this point, let me talk about that culture. How do we deal with those cultural limitations that silences women and doesn't give women and young people an opportunity to actually achieve the best of their potential? As achieving as you are, as successful as you are, in the highest position in the world, they couldn't let you speak at your daughter's wedding because you're a woman. And there are many harmful cultural practices that we need to do away with. How do we deal with those things, Excellency?
You see, there are cultural practices that are harmful. There are cultural practices that you can negotiate and still respect. Because a lot of people, when we are talking about cultural practices, it's like you don't belong to, you are not an African. You don't respect your culture. But I think what people must realize is that we are moving in a space that is very different from what it was many years ago. And therefore, our culture is also not static. It moves, it has to move with time and adapt to changing circumstances. So to that extent, we need to constantly engage with traditional leaders. We need to engage with traditional practitioners and
practitioners.
Because remember, all our countries, most of the African countries, have constitutions that are guaranteeing gender equality. And some of the cultures are actually going against the constitution because there are two systems coexisting at the same time. And that is basically the issues that some of us had been fighting for. when I was a law reformer in Namibia, I was instrumental in passing the Married Persons Equality Act, and it was like a bombshell. The type of things that I heard, men that fought alongside of me for the freedom of Namibia suddenly realized how important men were and why women should be subordinate to men, and we didn't want to hear that. And we campaigned, and the bill, that bill became an act today in Namibia, at least allowing married women to be able to enter into contracts, to be able to own property, because before that they could not. As a not because of the traditional law, but rather of the civil law that we had at that time, the common law of Namibia.
Madam Secretary, African youth is said to be an incredible reservoir of human capital, yet many of them are still wasting, unemployed. Talents are dying because of lack of opportunities on the continent. And I think that the challenge is leadership on the continent. Do you agree with me? And now, if you do agree with me, how do you think we can redefine and refine leadership in Africa?
You know, poverty, unemployment, lack of housing, lack of access to basic services that's the face of Africa, unfortunately. Despite the fact that Africa is a rich continent, and it is for me about priority. It is for me, where do we invest? And investment should be in people. It cannot be only in infrastructure. So I would like to see a leadership that responds to these issues that are being faced by youth. We have said many a times, and you will also agree with me, that if young people are dissatisfied, they can so easily join the forces today, as we know. And that is what we want to, that is what we want to fight, and we want to make sure that youth potential is actually groomed. So many times we have talked about the demographic dividend, and we continue to talk about the demographic dividend without making sure that the needs and the wants of young people are met, because that definitely is causes of conflict on our continent, and we need to deal with it. So it's a leadership that responds to this, not as a matter, as a matter of urgency, making sure that our countries have got investments that go into creating employment. Because unfortunately, in many of our countries, especially in my country, the private sector is small. So the biggest employer in Namibia is the government. But the government is too large, and eventually, they have to reduce. So what do we do about increase in the private sector? And so I would say that it is both a question of the government, but also the question of the private sector. People need to invest in order to create those industries and those sectors. But I also want to say to young people, you can become social entrepreneurs. Identify what the social needs are in your country, and create an enterprise that can do two things. You can make money, but you can also
solve a problem.
Social need or a social problem. So don't just want to be employees. You can actually be employers. But again, the environment has to be right for young people to make use of those opportunities. I have seen incredible innovations during COVID-19 that young people have brought to the fore, that they have basically developed the kinds of things that are needed to fight COVID. I sat in a meeting with young people once, and these were, business people from Africa, young. And there was a woman who said, when she gave birth, she almost died because there was not blood. What did she do? She started a blood transfusion business in her country with branches all over the country. So how do
continent?
Yes, how do we use our experience,
Challenges, yes,
and turn them into opportunities? That is what I will say. So it's something that the government must do, yes, but also what do we listen to me, what do we be as a youth, but what do you do in order to actually take the lead also in some of these things?
Another challenge, Excellency, is that it is impossible to build a future for us without us. So many times, young people are not consulted on issues of development. And how can you have sustainability without engaging young people? So a lot of the countries in Africa, a lot of member states don't have as much representation of young people in policy making platforms as we should. And so that affects the output of what is being delivered to young people in the communities and in their various countries. How do we increase young people's participation in public policy, in policy making and implementation?
I fought as a woman. I fought as a woman. Gender equality did never come on a silver plate. Women put themselves out there. They made their voices loud. They made themselves visible. And I continue to encourage youth. Make yourself visible. Fight for what you think is right. But at the same time, I just want also to add that it's true, as the African Youth Envoy today says, that we are talking about core leadership. And it's something that I fully support and I agree with. But leadership should never be confined to political leadership only. There are many different, platforms that you can be a leader. You can sit with a group of people and say, guys, we need to do this. And you take the leadership and you run with it. So this thing that everybody thinks you can only make a difference when you are president or when you are a minister or when you are a member of parliament. I think somehow we should really move away. It is important positions to occupy. I was never a minister in my country, but wherever I had been, whether it was on the Public Service Commission, whether I was on the Law Reform and Development Commission, I always made sure that the gender issue was on the agenda. But then the young people will say, but then we also want to be on those commissions so that we can put youth issues on the agenda, which I agree with. No, I think it is true. It is right that they should also demand that it's only when we are there that the youth will be heard, or that the youth can put their issues on the agenda. But I can tell young people that they have in me a representative. Wherever I have been, I've always made sure that the youth voices were heard. And I had been participating in intergenerational dialogues where I was talking to young people, and I hope that I will continue to encourage intergenerational dialogues where we actually sit together and discuss, because sometimes young people don't know where we were, what we did in our lives, the struggles that that we also had. And I think it is important that they also hear that side of the story, as much as we should also hear the other side of the story.
So let's hear some of the struggles that you went through. Perhaps it would also inspire us and encourage us. Please share with us, ma.
Well, I mean, as I said, growing up under apartheid, where whites were going to different schools, they had better educational opportunities than we were. And I remember one time whenever I was coming from school, I would go and help my mother, who was a domestic worker. So I would go into a white household and I will see this 4-bedroom house occupied only by 2 people. And yet the house that I loved and I grew up with, we were, 11 of us. And it was only a 2-bedroom house. Actually 4 rooms, a kitchen, a living room, and 2 bedrooms. And we had no running
It's a flat.
water. We had no running water. We had no electricity. And I was always asking myself, but why? Why is it that why these differences between us? Until I got that question from this white inspector that said my intelligence was much lower than that of a white child. And you see, when those kind of things happen, you really become determined to prove them wrong. And I proved apartheid wrong. And we proved apartheid wrong in so many different ways. That when I went to study law, I went to Warwick University, where I was sitting with white British or white students. And I got my degree, I passed very well. And I was saying, but what type of white people are here that are different from the white people in my country? That these ones maybe are of lower intelligence than me as a black because I was scoring good marks, I was doing very well. So those are some of the things that we go through. I had a brother, my elder brother. I was in my final year of high school, and he was murdered, and his body was dumped on the road. And we were looking for him. We could not find him until somebody identified him in a police mortuary. He was brutally maimed. And until today, we only know and we suspect through our own investigations that he was murdered by white people. And as I was sitting in that court, in the postmortem, and I saw white policemen, and I saw a white judge, and I saw white prosecutor, and I saw white, I said to myself, how can white people ever expect justice from a system that is white? That is where I decided that I am going to study law so that I can one day bring justice for my people. So all these are, as I said, these are experiences that I had. When I went into exile, I lived in refugee camps. I had never, for example, because I am a city girl, I grew up in the city, so it was the first time to actually stay in a camp, and I had to go and draw water from the well. And I could not even carry the bucket on my head. And the others that were there, that came from the villages in Namibia, basically put the bucket on the head and walked, So by the time I reached my place, my bucket was half full of water because I could not handle it. And so there was a reversal in the sense that when we were growing up in the city, we thought that we were better off. You understand? And we were always looking at people that were, living in the rural areas as suffering. But when I actually lived in what was a rural area in the refugee camp, I came to appreciate that whereas we would always have to have money to buy food, when you are in your rural area, you can grow your food. You can
in your backyard.
Yes, you are not dependent on money. Obviously, with time, you need money to buy your clothes and so on. So those ones were lessons that you learn and appreciate, the different circumstances under which people live, and so on. So it was a tough life for me to live, to live in refugee camps. I had my daughter when I was in a refugee camp. I brought her.
Wow.
Yes, I
The one
brought
that
her
got
up and
married?
I took her home. I took her home to Namibia when she was 10 years old, and she could not understand because Namibia is a very dry country. And we were
Hmm.
arriving back in Namibia during the winter times when it's dry. And she was like, Mom, seriously, was this the country you were fighting for? Was this the country you were fighting for? It's so dry because we were just coming in from Angola, which is green, you know. And so she could not
Hmm.
understand. And I said, yes, it might be dry, but underneath that dry earth, there is a lot of
Hmm.
richness.
Hmm.
There
Natural
are the
resources.
diamonds, the uranium, all those things live under this earth. And so, yes, but at the same time, I must say that there were so many lessons that I learned during my 12 years in exile, really understanding what other countries were going through, what other people were going through. And so I have a greater understanding and an appreciation of life. And my search for justice is still continuing. I still want to one day know what exactly happened to my brother. But at the same
Hmm.
time, I live in a country where we have accepted reconciliation, that we have to move
Yes.
together forward for peace to prevail. And I would never want to have a situation where we get back into a situation of conflict. So,
Hmm.
so
Bless you, ma.
I
Bless
am
you, ma.
willing to make those sacrifices for the sake of
Hmm.
peace and stability in my country.
Wow, wow, very inspirational, man. And all these things that you went through, you would think that that would be in the past, but they're still happening, and not just in Namibia or in Africa, but they're actually happening in the center of globalization. In Africa, look at in America, look at George Floyd. Are we doing enough to fight racism?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think the movement that has started, I mean, you must remember that we were Pan-Africanist, or we are Pan-Africanist. And the Pan-African
Hmm,
movement was a very strong movement. It was a
hmm,
movement that basically brought dignity back into Blackhood, into
hmm,
saying that, as an African, you can be proud of who you are because you know where you are coming from. And I think that along the way, we moved away from that identification. That's one. Racism is like sexism. It is in the minds of people. And
hmm,
until such time, because you see, sexism is something that I will fight against, but at the end of the day, it will be for men to change. It will be
hmm,
for men to accept me as their equal. So I
hmm,
cannot change a man's mindset, but
hmm,
it is going to be men starting to say sexism has got no place in this world. And that is
hmm,
and what is happening today in America and the world over is that a movement was born in this process. A movement where
hmm,
Black people are saying we need to deal with police brutality, we need to deal with racism. No,
hmm,
even in my own country, I don't think that because we have raised the Namibian flag and we have removed the apartheid flag, that with that we have dealt with racism. It happens in a more subtle way, but it is still there. And I always say to anyone that because I grew up under apartheid, I can smell it, I can see it with my eyes closed, and I can hear it. So no one can really tell me more about racism than what I have
hmm,
experienced under apartheid. So it's a
hmm.
reality. It's a reality for Black people. I mean, you have seen the situation of people all over the world. In China, it was not long ago that Black people were complaining about the treatment that they were receiving in China, everywhere in the world. it is an issue, and it's an issue that fortunately it had to take deaths of people for us to start waking up and say that this is unacceptable.
Well, while you were at the African Union and also while you were in the Public Service Commission in Namibia, you implemented a lot of policies, you introduced a lot of programs. But one of the challenges we have in Africa is not lack of policy. There's policy about everything. There's even policy about toilets. The only thing we lack is policy implementation. How do we create a link between policy introduction and policy implementation? How do we ensure that all these documents, we have the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, signed in 1989, was it 1991? Till today, many countries have not domesticated it. The African Union have so many policies, mechanisms, and tools. They're not implemented. Because if this is implemented, they would protect and safeguard our people, and they will make it less attractive for our people to even trying to be traveling all over the world, looking for solace, going through Libya and dying on water. How do we move to policy implementation?
That one is the biggest challenge. It is not just at the level of the African Union, it's also national policies, the implementation of national policies. And as I said before, it is really a question of the will to wanting to make that change, applying the resources where they are most needed. And I also want to believe we must fight corruption, because I believe that corruption undermines efforts to actually make life better for people. If I look at how much money are leaving the continent, are leaving our countries, and actually are invested in countries where they use those investments to build those countries. And those are monies that belong to the people. They are coming from, most of it comes from our natural resources, or they come from the taxes that people pay. And so I want to believe that it is a question of the will to wanting to make that change, and the commitment to wanting to see lifting people out of poverty, and applying priorities in terms of resource allocation. Where are the resources most needed? Do we need a new airport, or do we need rather to build better housing for people, or improve the sanitation, or access to clean water? Those are the choices that we make, and it's the wrong choices that we are making. So policy implementation definitely depends on resources, it depends on commitment and the political will to achieve that.
So talking about policies, the Agenda 2063, Agenda 2030, they seek to achieve the same thing. Where is the harmonization happening at the multilateral level and the intercontinental level?
You see, I see the Agenda 2063 as the common position that actually influenced Agenda 2030. Don't forget that. Agenda 2063 was before we had the SDGs. And so that harmonization is definitely there, because the two speak to the same thing. The one has got obviously a much longer term, and it is certain issues that are very specific to Africa that Agenda 2063 address. SDGs are global. Remember, it's yes, not applicable to Africa. So there is definitely synergies between these two. And actually, what the African Union is also doing is to build we have got, for example, the UN African Union a framework on the implementation of 2063 and 2030, and that is also one of the ways in which we want to harmonize the effective implementation of the two agendas.
Excellent. When you were also in Namibia, I think one of the bills that you worked on was the Sexual Rape Act, the Rape Act in Namibia. Was it in Namibia or the African Union Commission?
Namibia.
That was in Namibia. You know, one of the things that is going on right now with the lockdown and COVID is that domestic violence and sexual violence is at an all-time high. How does that make you feel?
You know, those are things that one would not necessarily think of. But imagine if you are living with an abusive partner and you are in lockdown. It must be hell on earth. And that is why people are starting to raise that issue to say, whilst we are doing the lockdown, we must also be aware of violence that are happening in those homes. And so I think there are the interventions that are being done to make sure that women and children are safe. There will be, even if the husband is not abusive, it's a difficult period. People are losing jobs. They get frustrated by the fact that they are staying home. It's happening everywhere. So we need to be alert to this issue, that even in normal times we had gender-based violence, and definitely
Yes.
everyone says that there is an increase in gender-based violence because a lot of this violence happen within a domestic setting, and the domestic setting is exactly the home where people are locked, that the lockdown is. So there is at least an awareness that this is happening and that something is being done about it.
The theme for this year's Day of the African Child is a child-friendly justice system. Madam Secretary, how do you think that regional corporations can help to ensure child-friendly justice system in Africa?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
What role would regional cooperation play in ensuring child-friendly justice system in Africa?
Well, you must first start with at the national level. You know, when you are talking about a child that has been abused and has to sometimes be a witness in a case, that child is treated like an adult. And so in a lot of cases, that child will definitely, or me as a mother would want to protect my child from the way in which that child might be questioned, the way in which that child might be dealt with. And that is why we are talking about justice, child-friendly, or access to child-friendly justice. Is just to say courts have to make a distinction between when they are dealing with children as opposed to when they are dealing with adults. We have got cases where young people are put in same cells as adult prisoners, in some of the countries. So there is definitely a case for calling for a justice system that is child friendly. We are here talking about things like separate rooms where children can give evidence if they have to give evidence, and that people are trained in how to deal with children, and so yes, children also have a right to justice, and they have to be heard within the justice system, but they have to also be treated with the dignity that they deserve as children. You will remember that every year the African Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child has got a theme. And some of the issues that may also tie in with the issue of justice is that when you do not register a child, that child is basically stateless. And I had, as a former ombudswoman, I had occasions where the mother, the daughter is not registered, the mother is not registered, the grandmother is not registered. So when it comes to access basic services, such as your pension. She cannot prove. There is no proof as to how old she is. She cannot prove to say where she was born. So an identity document or a birth certificate is, we take it for granted, isn't it? But it is actually the determining factor of your life going forward. And so if you are not recognized as basically existing in a country, you can die without anyone knowing that you were there, on earth. So all these things have got to do with justice, not just in terms of the court system, but actually the broader issues that encompasses. We are talking about child abuse. We talk about child neglect. We talk about fathers that fail to support their children, but want 10 children. Men want 10 children, but to support the 10 children, they are nowhere to be seen. When we as women are talking about choice, that we want to decide when we want children and how many children we want, men are the first ones that say, we want children. And yet we sit in a situation where we have got children that are there without fathers. Those children were not, artificially produced. They had fathers, but the fathers are nowhere. So when we are talking about children, all these things come into play.
Yes.
I'm very straightforward in discussions like this.
No, ma. That's what I'm gonna be straightforward in my final question can be a bit controversial.
Yes.
But you have fought so hard for your country, Namibia. Do you think that someday you will run for president of Namibia?
It has, I don't know why people aspire to be president. It's a tough job. It is a tough job, and I would I really like I really like what I do. I want to make a difference, and I mean, yes, presidents make differences, but there is so many demands placed on you.
Yeah.
Many different interests that you have to, manage. And no, I would not want to do that in my old age. I want to love my passion. I want to give back to my community what I'm capable of doing, because for me that will be the what do I call it, my greatest satisfaction in life is I want to work with the elderly. We have been talking about youth.
Yes.
And we have forgotten about the elderly within our societies. They do not have a voice. They are not visible. And we are just basically disregarding the contributions that they have made over their working lives. And I think it is so important that we recognize our elders and give them the respect that they deserve. And we should never forget that today you are youth, but tomorrow you will sit in my shoes.
Yeah.
And you would want others to take care of you. You would want others to respect you. So young people, hold your elders' hands. Assist them where you can, because yesterday they made it possible for you to be where you are today. Don't over this fight of leadership positions should not make us to start disregarding what the older people have done. So that's why I believe in this intergenerational dialogues, so that I can appreciate your perspective and you can also appreciate my perspective. My dad used to tell me, Dayo, you might have gone to school and you think that you are educated, but you are still illiterate, because you will never have the maturity, the wisdom and the experience that I have. Because there are certain things that you can never learn.
Learn in the classroom.
You cannot learn that in a classroom. So that was the wisdom that my dad imparted upon me. And I keep on repeating that whenever I talk to people, to say, education should not make us big-headed and think we know it all. Let us go back to our elders and let us ask for their wisdom, because they might not be able to read and write, but they have got that wisdom that you and I do not have.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking to the United Nations Undersecretary General for Africa, Her Excellency Bience Gawana. Mama, before I let you go, what is your final advice to young people who are watching this live or who will watch this video later on YouTube as a mother?
You know, Africa needs you. Africa needs you, and you need to play your part. Don't give up. Don't give up. Make sure that you are, that you are there. That you make sure that you are there at the right place at the right time. How that happens, I don't know. But my mom, going back to the days of struggle, when I was toying and I was, out there with the boys and the young men, and she would say, my daughter, stay at the back. You are a woman, that is for men. I said, Mom, when freedom comes, we will all benefit from that freedom. And I want to make sure that I contribute to that freedom. And so never stay back. Be there when you are needed and show. And sometimes, as I said, you do not need to be a leader to show your passion and to love your passion. And finally, everybody asks about legacy. I had been asking myself, what will be my legacy one day? And the advice that I got is start loving your legacy now. So that when you die, you will already know what your legacy is that you will leave behind. So love your legacy. You can start writing your obituary now. Write it in very nice, good terms, and then love according to your obituary. And let people read that obituary the day that you die. So leadership is important, but I can tell you, by giving, you receive so much in return. So volunteer work, if you don't have a job, sometimes you may want to do things so that people can see what you are capable of doing, so that people can see that you are out there. So that is really going to be my advice to young people, that we are all living in this space together. We will continue to respect each other for what we can bring into the space, and just don't give up. I did not give up against all odds. I persevered, and here I am. I always say that from a refugee, from a black girl that grew up under apartheid, to reach and become the Undersecretary General of the United Nations. I'm proud of what I have achieved, but I would never have made it this far if there were not others before me and those that are coming after me. So I would like to see more African women getting into this kind of position. So when I grew up, my only role models were nurses and teachers. Those were the only professions that were available for Black women. So we lived in a world where you did not see women in positions of power or authority. Today, you grow up in a world where many more women are out there. There was just a last point I want to make is that there were electricians, in the working, and then I went to the training center. And so at the training center, I asked, why are you not training more women, to become electricians or technicians? And the response was, oh, madam, to go up the ladder and those kind of things. I said, but they can wear trousers. I said, they can wear trousers if they are going up the ladder, But there is always going to be this assumption that because
excuses,
there were no women there before, therefore no other women, the women cannot. But today we see them, and that is, those are our role models, and always believe that you need to be equal to each other. The one should not try to be equal to. I mean, the point I always make is that women and men must be equal to each other, according to the human standard and not the male standard.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been listening to Her Excellency Bience Gawanas, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations for Africa. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. And I'm sure we are all inspired. And all the people who are going to watch this video later would also be inspired by your message. In particular, the woman that somebody told did not have the capacity or the intelligence to study law is now an Undersecretary General at the United Nations. Thank you so much for the life that you have lived and for the inspiration that you will continue to be for all of us African youth. God bless you. And to everyone who is watching, we want to say a big thank you for your time.
Thank you very
Thank you for your time.
Also, yes, thank you to everyone that has been watching. And I was reading the messages in between. Thank you very much.
Yes, well, thank you so much. And thank you so everybody who's been watching. It has been an insightful conversation. I'm going to play it again and listen over and over again. If you have a daughter, please send them the link. Let them watch it on YouTube. A story will inspire you that your daughter can be whatever they want to be. And tomorrow we have Nigeria's Minister of Women Affairs, Her Excellency Pauline Talent. She's going to join us. You see, Africa has so many powerful women. But tonight we have been with Her Excellency Bience Gawanas. Thank you, guys, and God bless you. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye, Dayo.